Hey, everybody, and welcome back to DeProgram Premium Content. Before Ted and I start talking, I wanted to say thank you again for your commitment to the show, for being a premium subscriber. We literally could not do it without you. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to get into a conversation now, Ted. Where we left off, you were at the Los Angeles Times. And I know, because I've known you for a long time, this was one of the most important, one of the most disappointing, maybe one of the most traumatic developments of your life. Can you tell us this story about the LA Times from the beginning?
True. So I was hired as the staff editorial cartoonist at the LA Times in 2009, and I was there for 6 years. In year 5, in 2014, and I should point out, it was a really great relationship. I had 3 editors, all women, Sue Horton, Cherry G, and Susan Brenneman. And I did lots of stuff for the Times aside from just drawing a cartoon. I also did a blog post that went with the cartoon. Like at the end of the year, when there's like the best cartoons of the year, they would do like a full page or 2 of all my cartoons across the print edition as well as online. They sent me to Afghanistan to cover the war there, and I did a graphic novel, and I filed graphic novel reports from there. So it was an intense relationship. I was presented by, as their cartoonist everywhere, LA Book Festival, blah, blah, blah. So needless to say, it was really like the best thing I had going on. And this was during a time when media was contracting a lot. So I was extremely grateful to have the gig. They were having a lot of financial problems around this period. They had gone through a number of owners. People might remember Sam Zell from the Chicago Tribune, who he was part of a consortium that basically screwed up the company, the whole Tribune Publishing. Tribune Publishing is based at the Chicago Tribune. They owned 15 papers, including the Baltimore Sun, Orlando Sentinel, San Diego Union Tribune, and the LA Times. But that stuff was sort of like neither here nor there. I worked for the 2 Sues and Cherry, and and I did my stuff, and I didn't really have reason to pay attention to any of this. The Uber editor was Nick Goldberg, was the editor of the whole editorial section. So unbeknownst to me, in 2014, the Times took on a new publisher named Austin Butner. Turns out he had very close political ties to the LAPD. In fact, if you looked at public record searches of campaign contributions by Austin Butner and the LAPPL, which is the police union, the Los Angeles Police Protective League, the LAPPL and Butner would make the same contributions in the same amount to the same recipients all throughout the year. So they were very, very close. He was a former mayoral candidate, but he was very unsuccessful. He was basically only had a few percentage points in the polls. He never really did very well there. And, but he had political ambitions. He was very wealthy. He was a hedge fund guy. But I didn't know about any of this. So, all throughout this period, I'm doing all the normal things that an editorial cartoonist does, including anti-police cartoons. The police, they do brutal stuff, right?
Yeah, they do. And we should add, too, the LAPD is the biggest police department in America, maybe the biggest police department on earth. So it's very, very powerful just by the fact of its sheer size, the number of its employees, and the strength of its union.
And it's highly militarized.
And
it was they invented the SWAT team, the whole idea of it. At the time, the pension fund was worth over $16 billion. They decided in 2014, at the same time they brought Butner on, to purchase controlling interest in Tribune Publishing. So therefore, they became the owner of the LA Times. This is legal. It's totally legal for a government entity like the LAPPL to purchase a media company. They could buy CBS if they wanted,
Mm-hmm.
if they had the money. There's no law against it, nothing at all. And here's the thing too, it's really secret. The readers of the LA Times were never told that this was the case. Now, there was a precedent. The same union purchased controlling interest in the San Diego Union Tribune, which was split off earlier in 2009. And at the time, they were very bold about it. They said, we want to fire, and they did. They fired every member of the San Diego Union Tribune editorial board who they deemed not being supportive enough of the police. They fired them. And they said it like, we own the paper. We shouldn't have to put up with any criticism in the paper. So, this is all stuff that I got to learn later. In the summer of 2015, one of my cartoons was about a crackdown against jaywalking. Which always falls to, first of all, what they do in LA, it's a misdemeanor, and it's a $200 ticket. It's very expensive. They've reformed this since then, but at the time it was kind of brutal, and it fell disproportionately upon the poor and working class.
The first ticket I ever got in my life, I was 18 years old. It was for jaywalking, and it was $2 on Capitol Hill.
Oh wow, $2.
$2.
$2 too much, as far as I'm concerned.
Agreed.
So I wrote this blog to go with the cartoon that made fun of the crackdown, and I said, "Look, this is personal to me because back in 2001, 3 weeks after 9/11, I was arrested for jaywalking in LA, in West Hollywood. I was on Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher. I was walking on Melrose Boulevard in West Hollywood on my way to meet some friends. A police officer named Will Durr pulled me, a motorcycle cop, grabbed me off the street on the sidewalk. By the way, I wasn't jaywalking, which is the grand irony here. And he grabbed me, whipped me around, roughed me up against the wall, handcuffed me, treated me like dog shit, detained me for, as I later found out, about 8 minutes, 8.5 minutes. And basically, although it seemed like it lasted a lot longer, and while he's writing the ticket, there was like an angry crowd of people who gathered, and they started like yelling at him, and he yelled back at them. It was quite a scene, and I was kind of like worried. I kind of wanted them to leave, because I just didn't want it to escalate. And I thought, this could be really bad. Here I am handcuffed. Yeah. Anyway, his partner finally came and just said, like, "What the fuck are you doing? Let's go." So he uncuffed me, gave me my summons, threw my driver's license on the ground, and took off. I filed an internal affairs complaint. Nothing came of it. So that had happened 14 years earlier. I wrote about this. Paul Pringle, who's an investigative reporter at the LA Times, I think he's still there. He calls me. I'd never heard of him or from him. He's like, "Hey, this is Paul Pringle at the Times. The LAPD is calling into your account into question." And I said, "Well, of course they're doing that." And he said, "Well, they actually have evidence." I'm like, "What evidence?" "Well, your police officer was audio taping your arrest." And I'm like, "In 2001?" He said, "Yeah." "Can I send you I'll send you a Dropbox file. I'll send you the audio." So he sends me the audio, and the audio is just crackling street noise. You can barely hear that there might be some voices. I've listened to that thing more times than I could count. And honestly, I can't swear that it's me. I mean, I know now that it was me, but the sound quality is a joke. Anybody who listens to it, and this has been written about by major newspapers, they all say it's laughable. So Paul goes, "Well," and I said, "Well, what?" He goes, "Well, there's no sound of the handcuffs going on. There's no sound of the angry crowd. There's none of the things you said are there. Can't hear you being roughed up." And I remember saying, like, this was not Martin Scorsese's boom mic. Okay, you can't hear anything. I said there could have been space aliens on that audio. You can't hear anything. He's like, "Well, this doesn't look good for you." And I said, "What does this mean? What have you been asked to do? Are you investigating me? Are you going to write about it? What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I don't know. They didn't tell me." And I said, "What do you mean they didn't tell you?" He said, "Oh, I was just asked to call you and, ask you these questions." And so I just thought the whole thing was very strange. And,
It's
especially
ominous.
I've been working. Yeah. So I called up my friend Scott Stantis from the Chicago Tribune, and he goes, "Oh, you're fucked." He goes, "This is coming from the publisher, and these things always come from the publisher, and you're being set up." He was, of course, 100% right. That evening, I get a call from Nicholas Goldberg, and he asks me, "What's going on, Ted?" I go, "What do you mean? You tell me what's going on." He goes, "I don't know. I've heard these like rumors in the building." And I'm like, "They didn't tell you anything?" He goes, "No." And I'm like, "So you're calling me to find out what's going on?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so then that confirms to me Scott's assessment. So I get really, really nervous. So he goes, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll call you tomorrow and we'll figure out what's going on." So the next day I have a cartoon due. So I file my cartoon. It doesn't run in the next day's paper. It's the first time that's ever happened. So but they didn't tell me you're suspended or anything like that. But they haven't told me anything. I don't know what's going on. And finally, I get this call in the evening from Nick, and he goes, "Tomorrow morning, we're going to run an editor's note that says that because you lied,
Oh my God.
you're never going to be working for the LA Times again. So it'll be in the print and in the edition and online." So of course I know at this point, my career is over. I am fucked. I mean, this is death for a journalist, right? I mean, I could like rationalize and say, even if I'd been lying, it's an opinion piece.
Yeah.
It's like,
Right.
it's impressionistic. It's like, it's, I didn't say anything specific about the police officer. I didn't name him by name. I was telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, I couldn't prove anything. So I stayed up all night. I knew that the next morning, this was going to be all over national news. So I stayed up until 4 a.m. and I wrote on my blog a detailed accounting of everything that happened, between, from the very beginning back in the 2001 all the way through the day before. And I just explained it in detail so that I could tell my side of the story, so that when people Google my name, they would find that and they'd know that I was not accepting this point of view. Their story, I'm not going to be silent, because it's like being silent, that's just accepting it was not true. They lied. So that was on a Friday. Sorry, no, that's not true. That was on a Monday. And the next day it hit. It was all over. Breitbart lead story, Fox News lead story, AP, everywhere. And I reached out to all of my clients, my syndicates. I have 2 syndicates, for my column and for my cartoons, my literary agent, everybody. I said, "Listen, I know what you're hearing. It's not true. I'm not asking you to side with me, but I'm working on it. Please don't make any decisions. Please just sit tight and let me work on this. And, just be quiet. I'm not asking for your support," which I'm really grateful they all did. I get the next day, I start getting these emails from people who say, "Are you familiar with audio enhancement technology?" And I wasn't.
No, who would have been back then?
Right. So I said, "I have no idea what that is. Authentication and enhancement." And so I went down this rabbit hole, and so basically audio enhancement technology is where you can take a sound recording, and you can strip away like a track, and then discover if there's let's say a track full of traffic noise, there might be something hidden and masked underneath. This is admissible in court. It's used by the FBI. It's been used to solve criminal cases, like a gunshot that suddenly appears and stuff like that. And then there's audio authentication, which is where you prove that the audio recording was made at the time and in the way that it was described. And in order for that to happen, you have to have the original device with which it was made. Otherwise, if you don't have that, there's no way to prove it. Now, in this case, the original device must have been made with a microcassette recorder, which was the technology in 2001 that he was wearing, like on his coat, hidden, right? What I received was a digital file. So I was literally fired based on something that they couldn't authenticate. But that came into play later. So I was like, okay, well, I don't know what to do. I spent like the 3 days trying to figure out like who could authenticate this, who could enhance this audio quickly. It was a Hail Mary pass. Like there might not be anything on there. Long story short, I found a company called Post Haste Digital. It's a Hollywood post-production company. And they said, we can turn this shit around like really quick, like in a couple of days. And I was like, that's what I need. I can't wait months. So $12,000 later, which is what I need, is like, it's my entire life is about to blow up. I was like, it killed me, but I had to have it. I sent it out. 36 hours later, I wake up. It was like Friday morning, I think it was. I wake up and the first email said it was from Post Haste, and the subject line was "Merry Christmas." So I open it up. There's an enhanced version of the audio and an official transcription created. This is admissible in court, right? They're like, it turns out the whole story comes out, right? It's still shitty, but you can hear people screaming at the police officer, him saying, fuck you. You can hear people say, stop hurting him, take off his handcuffs, over and over. And so it completely validated and vindicated what I had to say. By this point also, I was working for a company called A New Domain, which was a tech website. And I was on staff for this. And the entire crew just basically decided to go to investigate the links between the LAPPL and the LA Times. These were all financial reporters. And so they started doing a deep dive. That's how I found out a lot about this stuff. And I was like, the more I learned, the uglier it was getting. So I was so naive. I contacted Nick and the two Sues and Cherry. And I said, look, I sent them the stuff. I said, you guys are wrong. Here's the stuff. Crickets. They didn't reply. Now I was like, that's fucked up. I mean, they should have said, if they were journalists, they should have said, oh, okay, thanks for sending this, Ted. We'll look into it and we'll get back to you. It should also be pointed out that, by the way, in their investigation, they never called me. I was never allowed to talk to my editors, right? Like the people who knew me best, the two Sues and Cherry, never got to talk to me. And I did talk at one point right before I was fired to Susan Brenneman. And she said, LAPD, they're such assholes. That sounds like cops being cops. And she was like totally on my side. But that's the last I heard from her. Cherry G, obviously they were all told to shut the fuck up and not get back to me because they were like in a pre-litigation kind of scenario. I printed all this, A New Domain printed it, and it started to spread. Greg Palast, the investigative reporter, and we were friends at the time, he calls up Nick. Now, the truth can be told. I've never said this ever in any kind of public forum. Nick, at the time, Greg was living in New York State. New York State is a one-party recording state,
like Virginia.
So basically he called Nick Goldberg and taped the call, did not inform Nick. And he said on the recording, he's like, so Nick, Ted told the truth. Why aren't you taking him back? And Nick says, there's much bigger forces at work here. And then Greg goes, yeah, but you've got to take him back. He told the truth. That's basic. You have to take him back. And he's like, there's no circumstance under which we would take him back. Are you? So then it's like, so are you saying he told the truth? He's like, yeah, we know. And then he's like, but you're just going to hang him out to dry. He goes, that's the size of it. And so we kept that recording, and we never would have been able to use it like in open court, but we would have been able to use it to impeach any evidence by Nick Goldberg if he'd ever been deposed. And then we could have gone into judges' chambers and had his testimony stricken if he lied under oath. So so this was just like, it was getting more and more monstrous. So once this all started to go up, it started to go viral. It was all over the internet. They got 14,000 subscription cancellations over this story.
Good.
The Guardian did 2 pieces about it. They did their own audio enhancement and got the same results as Post Haste. New York Observer under Jared Kushner did their own, and that's a conservative paper.
It is.
They got the same results also, and they started crusading about it. And Greg did his own enhancement, found the same thing. So even the head of I forget her name, but the president of the Neiman Foundation for Journalism issued a statement saying that this is, the New York Times. They said the Los Angeles Times has really fucked up in the Ted Rall situation, which was amazing for someone like her to say on Twitter at the time, not X. And so I was feeling really torn. I mean, the whole country was Rush Limbaugh.
Oh my God.
He said, Ted Rall is a total asshole and I can't stand anything about him. The Los Angeles Times owes him his job back, clearly. And so, so I had everyone on my side. I mean, it was just like, clearly I was wronged. But the LA Times is not replying, right? They're just not replying. So they kept hope. It was so out of control. They had to shut down their comment section for the entire LATimes.com for a week, because even when they were published in sports stories, there would be like, oh yeah, you say that the Packers won, but like, what did the LA Times the LAPD tell you to say?
Oh my God.
So they're getting eaten alive in the court of public opinion. I don't want any of this. I just want to get back to work, and I want them to acknowledge that they smeared me. I didn't want to sue them. I wanted them to issue a retraction. It kept building and building. It was August. I think they probably thought in the dog days of August, nothing's going to happen. It didn't. It didn't go away. It's like the Epstein files. It didn't go away. 3 weeks later, they decide to print. They go back. They print a 2,000-word response. They say, there's a lot of concern among our readers about this. So now we have hired our own audio enhancement expert to review the audio. And here's what we found. The guy's name is Ed Primo. Ed Primo is a big name. He authenticated the Zapruder film.
Oh my God. Okay. Right.
They quote him and they say, I was not able to hear anything that Ted Rall said was on his audio. I'm like, first of all, I didn't say anything that was on my audio. First, Post Haste Digital and the New York Observer and Greg Palast and the New York and the Guardian all said what was on it, right? Not me. I'm not an audio expert. I don't know anything about it. Never even heard about this shit. So I was like shocked. I was like, but this guy is a big deal. So Gina Smith, who was my editor at A New Domain, she goes, oh, I know Ed. I'll call him. So she calls hours. She's like, she's not getting back to me. Turns out she's talking to Ed the whole time. They went to college together.
Oh my God.
She gets back on the phone with me and she goes, Ted, you better be sitting down. She goes, they lied about Ed Primo. They never hired him. He wrote back and he said, like, to the LA Times, it's going to cost like 10 grand. They didn't want to pay. So they said, well, can you, without being paid, what do you hear on the audio? And he wrote back, I'm not going to be able to hear anything that Ted Rall found on the audio because of because you have failed to hire me and I can't conduct the proper investigation.
Yes. They
chopped off the end of that quote and published it in the LA Times. So,
my God, they've moved into the criminal.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And so so I didn't want to sue, but ultimately I'm like, I gotta sue. Greg was like, you've got to sue. If you don't sue, you're going to be destroyed. And so I had a really hard time finding first of all, one of the things that the LA Times does, and all big defendants do, is they try to put every major law firm in the town on retainer.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you call a 1,000 lawyer law firm, and one of those attorneys is on retainer with the LA Times, they can't and won't take your case.
That's right.
So I'm calling all over LA. I'm dealing with like little law firms in Woodland Hills. Like, it's just like, I worked my way down methodically. And, I talked to every intake person at every firm, right? I did talk to this one guy. He basically had written like the whole like defamation law for California when he was a state assemblyman. He was in Sacramento, and he said, I already know about your case. I saw it all about on Fox. He goes, if you don't win, there's no defamation law is dead in the state of California. But all the lawyers I talked to told me the same thing. They said, what's going to happen is the LA Times is going to bring in this lawyer. Her name is Kelly Sager. She has no ethics. She will burn you. It will be lawfare. She will destroy you. There's no decency whatsoever. And she will file an anti-SLAPP motion against you. So SLAPP is strategic lawsuit against public participation. And originally the anti-SLAPP statute was meant to defend whistleblowers and community activists from basically being swamped by large plaintiffs who were trying to shut them up. But it's being increasingly used by major defendants like the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, to stifle defamation claims. Like a good example is the New York Times used one against Sarah Palin. So an anti-SLAPP is really fucking hard to beat, because once the motion is filed, all discovery is stayed. And then you're going to have to get past the standard of Sullivan versus New York Times, 1964, where as a public person, you're going to have to prove actual malice, which means either that they knew in advance that what they were publishing was false and didn't care, or they were negligent and they just didn't bother to check it out. Now, in my case, it was very unusual. They did know that what they were publishing in the first publication of the editor's note, I might not have much of a case because they could say, well, we thought it was legit. By the time they published the second one, where they're fucking with Ed's words and they're saying that there's nothing there when they know there is, like at this point, that's falsehood. They're knowingly publishing falsehood. That's actual malice. So finally, I'm sitting at home one day, and I read this case about T.J. Simers, who was a sports writer for the LA Times. And he had just won $7 million from the LA Times, represented by this guy, Carney Shigarian. And basically, he was an age discrimination lawsuit. And I was like, this is a guy who knows how to sue the LA Times. So I called him up. And by the way, I talked to lots of great people. I talked to Lisa Bloom, who was Gloria Allred's daughter. Lots of famous attorneys. Anyway, so I get Carney on the phone. He's all about it. He can't wait. He's salivating. So I fly to LA, go to his offices in Santa Monica, and I'll never forget. He was like a punk rock attorney. He like wore like a white like V-neck Fruit of the Loom t-shirt and like jeans, and he comes in all swaggery. And I tell the story, by this point, I've told this story 50 or 60 times, to reporters and lawyers. And I guess I was probably kind of like flat affect, just the facts, and he's like, you don't seem very angry. And I was like, you don't think I'm fucking angry? Like, I'm fucking furious. I could kill these fucking people. And then he was like, okay, that's more like it. That's what I want to see on the stand. And so, so he took me on. We filed the claim. He fucked up. He insisted on filing in state court. If we'd filed in federal court, which we could have easily done because of, it's the internet, it goes across state lines, he thought we'd make more money in state court, but we wouldn't have had to deal with the anti-SLAPP statute.
Yeah, that's a real miscalculation.
It was a huge problem. And, he was really more of a wrongful termination lawyer than a defamation lawyer, but he was the only game in town. And he was very aggressive. When he signed me up, he goes, everything is going to be like, I'm going to personally represent you in court. I'm going to argue this case. He goes, this is going to go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. This is going to be war. And he's like, we're going to kill them. He's like, you'll never have to work another day in your life. He's like, this is like a $50 million claim. It's going to be like, it's going to make history. So we go to our first hearing. The judge is this Latina 50-something community activist from East LA. I'm like, that's looking good for Ted Rall. So and sure enough, it's amazing. During oral arguments, Kelly Sager is there. And so the judge is like, okay, so bear in mind, if you continue to argue that Mr. Rall didn't tell the truth, then you're adding to your potential damages down the line. So for the record, are you still alleging that Ted Rall lied in his blog post from May of 2015? It's like, no, Your Honor, we're not. Okay, then then she goes, why do the defense? But she goes, well, why do I see Ted Rall in my courtroom and not in my newspaper? And she goes, well, Ted Rall is trying to force the LA Times to publish his work. And she's like, I've read the complaint. He asked the judge the court to come up with the proper remedy. Apparently he's asking for money. He's not asking to be restored to the paper, although I'm sure he'd like to try again. And so anyway, she's like, so she's like, we move on. So motion for summary judgment denied with prejudice, right? Like we go on. And so I'm like, yeah, this is going to be great. 3 weeks later, just the couple of days before our next hearing, my lawyer calls. Carney goes, yeah, the judge retired. Like, what do you mean the judge retired? He's like, yeah, I've never seen anything like that. The judge just retired. It's like, but she's pretty young. It's like, yeah, she's not really retirement age, but she's just retired. This became like one thing after another started happening like this. So we have to wait for a new judge to be appointed. So there's all these delays because of the judge. Finally, we get a new judge. The new judge is 85 years old. He looks like he slept outside. They like, oh, the courts are short-staffed. We're bringing in retired judges as substitute judges into the California courts. This is 2016 by now. It's like, so we go into trial. Now, by this point, it's so funny. So the pile of paperwork on the judge's desk from my case is literally 2 feet high. And so we go in there, and he goes, Judge Kalin, and he goes, all right, well, I read this yesterday. I'm like, yeah, sure he did. He's like, I'm like thinking of like Data from Star Trek. Like Data, he was not. Anyway, the guy didn't understand the case. He couldn't pronounce my name, and he was completely predisposed to, basically to the LA Times. He's like, well, why would the LA Times lie about this? Blah, 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 blah. And my lawyer is like trying to explain it. It was kind of like where the fix was obviously in, right? So we had 3 rulings in a row. The first one denied. The next day, I get this email from my lawyer, Carney. He goes, due to the incredible disagreements about how to handle the case, we're parting ways. I'm like, what disagreements? We never had a conflict about anything. We never literally ever argued about anything. He just fired me as his client because I guess he thought we were going to lose. Turns out also, as I later found out, the same time, he fired his other LA Times plaintiffs all at the same time.
Talk about the fix being in.
The fix was
They got to him.
They got to him. So I filed a complaint, by the way, later with the Bar Association.
Good.
But it's a boys club.
Yep.
And of course, obviously, it was tossed they never even called me to like talk to me about it. So anyway, so at this point, I'm like, I'm like now pro se. So while this is going on, I'm like not quite, I don't want to represent myself. I get this call from God, this is like so upsetting, and I have to go back to all this. So I get this call from Roger Lowenstein, who is a very storied lawyer. As a young man, he started out on the Chicago 7 case. He's one of the last of the crusading leftist lawyers. And he was the showrunner for LA Law.
Oh my gosh.
So he's a colossus. And he's like, my old law school roommate at Harvard has been following your case. He thinks it's fucking outrageous. And he wants me to go and and represent you. He's like, I'm in. He's like, but I need 3 weeks to get up to speed on the case. He's like, I'm on vacation in Vermont, for the summer. So, I'm like, all right, like that's reasonable, right? Oh, and I'm forgetting the little at the very beginning of the suit. I had, what's his name? Tom Girardi at the very beginning. Tom Girardi, the disgraced lawyer. He basically, this was like the very early stages. Lisa Bloom called me and said, there's case law in California. You have to file your complaint about defamation within 10 business days of publication, or you lose all ability to do it. So all you have to do is file a letter, and they have to receive it. But that's, you have to give them a chance to fix it. So Girardi loves this case. He's all about it. But then day 8, 9 rolls around, and I'm like, what's going on? And he's like hemming and hawing and dragging his feet. And as I later found out, he was not only was he best friends with Charlie Beck, the police chief, and hanging out like every week or with him, but on top of that, he was sleeping with someone who ended up being one of the judges in my case. So Girardi was a piece of work. He's now off in prison where he belongs.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, finally, he did send in a very poorly, shitty version of a placeholder letter to satisfy on day 10 my requirement. So that's before I got Carney. So I had Tom, Carney, and then Roger. And I was also simultaneously talking to this guy, Jeff Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, Jeff and Roger ended up being my team. So Jeff was he's a local LA lawyer, mostly did real estate stuff, but he was one of the leading advocates of the anti-SLAPP law. He was worried that if my case moved forward, the state's anti-SLAPP law would be blown up. And
it could be declared unconstitutional, even at least.
I think it is,
at least in opposition to the state constitution.
Yes, unconstitutional as applied.
Exactly,
right,
as applied. Yes.
Yeah, not prima facie, right?
Right.
So Roger was it was kind of the dream team, the guy who's like pro anti-SLAPP law, and Roger, the crusading lefty Hollywood lawyer. But it was just the two of them and the people that they worked with. So they're like, okay, well, you're going to have to defend, So I go to court, I file a motion myself. By the way, it costs $540 to file every motion, as I found out.
What?
In the LA courts, every single motion.
That's outrageous. See, and there again, they deny due process to the poor.
That's right. That's exactly right. It was very interesting. So I went in ex parte to the judge, and I said, listen, I've got a new lawyer. I just need 3 weeks. LA Times is like, Kelly is like, no way. This case needs to go through quickly. I'm like, you guys have been delaying it for a year and a half. This is like, really? Suddenly you're in a hurry? Judge Kalin totally sides with her. I have to go in and argue against Kelly Sager myself. Greg is like, you're gonna lose. And of course he was right.
He lost.
And it's in front of an entire courthouse full of cameras and reporters from, every TV network. They're all there watching, right? I see this reporter from the LA Times there, this young lady. So during the break, I go and I'm like, hey, I'm Ted Rall. Would you like to interview me? she starts to run away from me. I go, "Hey, where are you going?" And I go, I'm the plaintiff. And she goes, "I'm not allowed to talk to you."
Unbelievable.
So anyway, obviously I got my ass kicked in that hearing. And, but then, so finally Roger's like up to speed, and he's like, "Well, we can appeal to the appellate division. That's the next step." So we go to the appellate division. Now there's 16 panels of judges in the LA appellate court. 15 out of 16 are liberal. There's the 16th one. Roger goes, "We'll be fine. 15 out of 16, those are good odds." Guess which one I get? Including the justice who was fucking Tom Girardi. So, who, by the way, didn't have a word to say. So Roger is great and Jeff is great. And they go up there and they're like, "Listen," so their judge, both of them are like right-wing former prosecutors. The one formerly from Arizona. And she's like, "Show me where the case law is to support this." And then, they know, and they're like, this. And she's like, "Oh, I guess we'll research that and get back to you." Of course, they reissue the same denial, literally word for word as before. The fix is in. So at that point, an anti-SLAPP in California, you're pretty much fucked. You're done. Like, you can't, you're definitely entitled to appeal to the appellate. Everyone gets that. You can appeal to the Supremes, but they never take it to the state Supreme Court. So Roger's like, "Let's apply to the state Supreme Court." And I'm like, "Okay, whatever." My mother was dying, and I was on my way. I just landed in Ohio when Roger calls, and he goes, I have him on speaker in the car. He goes, "You won't believe this shit. They took the case. They only take one in like 8,000 appeals."
Oh my God.
They took it.
I didn't know this.
And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And it's like, "Yeah, you're in front of the California Supreme Court." Like, so so they have, this was, I guess 2018 or 2019. I think 2019. So we wait. There's oral arguments. I couldn't go. They do it. The court comes down on my side, 5-0. In their ruling, they say, "This appears to be one of the most egregious examples of political corruption in the history of the state of California."
Oh my God.
So they even call for an investigation by the Inspector General. So I'm like, "Oh."
Yeah, I'm wondering why you're not living on Fifth Avenue.
Well, so now I'm going to tell you. So COVID. So my mom dies February 7th, 2020. COVID lockdown goes into effect February 25th, 2020. And after the lockdown, my lawyers call and they say, "Listen, all the courts are being shut down. They're going to get back to us when they get back up. We don't know what's going on next. But we won't hear shit from them for 6 months at least." But 6 weeks later, on April Fool's Day, 2020, we get a ruling from the California Supreme Court. Reversal, 0-5. They reversed their previous decision. No comment whatsoever. None. No, and they said it's a decertified decision, like Bush v. Gore, which means they're admitting it's bad law, and it can never be used as a precedent by anyone else. 0-5. So basically, it's just like, it's sort of like that one time you and I were talking about something where it's like, this law applies to everyone who's not named John Kiriakou. Mm-hmm. This law applies to everyone who's not named Ted Rall. Mm-hmm. So the next day, I see it. I turn on the TV, CNN, and there is Dr. Pat Soon-Shiong, who is the new owner of the LA Times.
Yep, billionaire from like Taiwan or Hong Kong or something.
South Africa.
Really?
Yeah, he's a South African, ethnically Chinese billionaire. Big pharma guy who's got all sorts of ethical issues himself.
Sure.
Basically makes his money from killing cancer patients. there's Dr. Pat next to Governor Gavin Newsom of California, and they're holding a joint press conference, and they say, oh, there's all of these LA area hospitals that have been shut down by Dr. Pat. He's agreed to reopen them to serve California COVID patients.
Oh, how
Thank
kind
you so
and generous.
much.
Wonderful.
I found that the other two major LA Times cases that were pending in the courts had been reversed the day before, also on April 1st in various courts. So again, the fix was in. By the way, Dr. Pat never reopened any of the hospitals. Gavin got rolled. So this story will be a story that if Gavin Newsom runs for president, I will be saying to over and over to the point, John, you will be bored.
You've got to shout it from the rooftops.
So at that point, we then, God bless Roger. He's licensed before the bar to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court. So he reached out to the Supreme Court, and it turns out Clarence Thomas was really interested in hearing my case. He hates the anti-SLAPP law. He thinks the anti-SLAPP law is unconstitutional because it denies you your right to a jury trial, which is true. I agree with Justice Thomas on this point. However, when you count the votes, ironically, we would lose because of the liberal justices, because it's the conservatives who are more skeptical of the anti-SLAPP statute than the liberals. At the time, this was before Trump had all his appointments. There was no, there was still a slim liberal majority. So we were going to lose like 6-3. And Roger said, we have a choice. We can go there and you can get, you get interviewed by Nina Totenberg and it'll be very exciting. But we're going to make bad case law and anti-SLAPP will be enshrined for a generation. And everyone who's in your situation will be in this situation for the rest of their life. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I mean, I don't want anyone to go through what I went through. So then came the ultimate kick in the ass, where the Times was awarded all of its legal fees, its padded legal fees. And so they filed a $1.2 million judgment against me in California, which still presumably is still standing, plus interest, which is accumulating by the day. Like, it's a lot of money. It's like hundreds of dollars a day.
Sure.
And so that was my LA Times case. Now, I would say that everyone kind of admits I think everyone who has any brains and followed the story knows that I told the truth. And anybody who was curious watching this wants to listen to the enhanced and the unenhanced copies of the audio. They're all over the internet. You can find them. They're on my website, rall.com. But it was a really deeply traumatic experience, because it was this act of betrayal. Now, Cherry G took her retirement. She took a buyout. And as part of the terms of her buyout, as I later learned, she's not allowed to speak ill of the LA Times. She has a non-disclosure. Non-disparagement. That's it. I
have one of those.
Yeah,
and then they ended up disparaging me and I had to go back to court.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So so there's all that shit. And that's basically how, and so, when I'm deeply sympathetic to people who are defamed by newspapers. They did this just because they wanted to curry favor with the LAPD, and they were their owners at the time, and they just can't admit doing wrongdoing. Mm-hmm. There were negotiations for settlement when things were going well, and they did offer me a lot of money that I would have never had to work again, but they required me to never speak about this ever. I would have just been like, and I wouldn't have been able to say that I received money. I wouldn't have been able to say that they admitted they would. And here's the kicker. They would refuse to take the 2 articles offline. They're still there. And it's like, I was like, literally like, I can live with the non-compete. I mean, with the non-disclosure. Cause I'm like, gee, why does Ted have his own hydrofoil now?
Yeah. Yeah.
But why does Ted drive a Ferrari? but like, cartooning must be doing really well. But they, that's what but anyway, I couldn't live with it. My mom was still alive when we were having those discussions. And my mom always told me, never admit to anything that you didn't do. And that was like essentially like admitting that I had lied, and I didn't do it. I didn't lie. So, yeah, I mean, you know what it's like, John.
Yes, I do.
Falsely accused of shit.
Yes, I do. Yes, indeed.
So
I didn't realize this was still going on when you and I met each other.
Yeah.
So you've been doing exactly the same thing I've been doing. A little bit here, a little bit there, some writing here, some writing there. You publish a book, you give a speech, you do a portrait, and you put together a living. That's
exactly. No, we've been doing exactly the same sort of thing. Yeah. That's exactly how it is.
So what's next for you then?
Well, DeProgram seems to be doing great.
I have to say, DeProgram seems to be doing great.
So I have high hopes that sooner rather than later, that'll be a full-time income.
Yes.
I have plans for, various books I feel like the book industry is like really in trouble right now though. The whole model's broken down. There's no book reviews. It's hard to line up book tours and signings that are worth doing. Yeah. But I have so much old IP that I want to repurpose and, try to turn into, I can like create books of old cartoons, sell them through the podcast and so on. And of course, obviously, I just feel like the longer it's like that movie Playing for Time. The longer you're here, something will come up. Someone will call. Someone will like me. Someone will care. Something will come up. Yeah. So
something will.
That's So basically, no, I don't have any like magic plan. I mean, I'm always pitching stuff to Hollywood.
Yeah, me too. But it's all about the hard work. That's really what it comes down to. You just can never stop working.
That's it.
Honestly, and I'm not saying this just because we're friends or because we're doing the show together. You and I are the two hardest working people I know.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, that's true.
Seriously.
Yeah. No, and it's like in a way, I'm not really going to go so far as to say that like it's a blessing, but that's if there's an upside to what we've been through, they forced us to be. But I think, we were both hardworking before any of this shit happened anyway.
Yes, indeed.
That became very clear to me. That's how we were raised.
That's how we were raised. That's right.
Everyone worked. We came from a place where everyone working hard was just expected.
You know what? I shined shoes when I was 9. I got a paper route when I was 10. I did that until I was 15. I became a grave digger at 15.
Oh, wow.
Because the guy on my paper route owned a cemetery. He liked my work ethic. And so I dug graves for a few years. And then I went to Kroger and spent the rest of high school at Kroger.
Hey, that's unionized. That's a good. That was
United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 123. Yes, sir.
I was a bag boy at Freedom Foods, which we aspired to go work at Kroger's, which paid a lot better.
Yeah.
I had a paper route: Dayton Daily News, Dayton Journal Herald, Kettering Oakwood Times.
I was Newcastle News, Youngstown Vindicator, and that occasional Pittsburgh Post Gazette.
I cut the lawns. Customer. I cut all my neighbors' lawns, raked their leaves, shoveled their snow. So it's working hard. Well, whatever. It's like, got
to do it.
There's no, it's like I didn't come from money. I didn't have a choice,
I felt the same way. Yep. Had to work. And there's dignity in all work, and it makes us the people that we are.
I couldn't agree more. Seems like a good place to leave it.
That's right. Let's thank. I want to thank again our premium subscribers. Again, it's because of you that we're able to do this and to keep it going. So thank you. And thanks for learning about Ted Rall with me. I did not know 95% of the details of that case. So we're going to have more of these. Thanks, Ted. This was great.
It was such a fun experience, and you're a great interviewer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. All the best, everybody. Ted, I feel for you, man. This is
let me turn this
not
up.
Right.